Good evening, everyone. My name is David Elwood, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. It's especially inspiring about your commitment to public service that you're here when it's like that out there. But it's going to be well worth your time. This is a very exciting and important program and really does represent the very heart and soul of what the Harvard Kennedy School is all about. It's about service. It's about making the world a better place. It's about thinking about something larger than yourself. I should mention that since this is the first forum of the year, that there will be events essentially every night, it seems, and certainly quite frequently. Our next forum event, for example, is a wonderful event. It's on justice. This is about public service. Next one's on justice. Michael Sandel will be leading a panel that includes Lonnie Guinier, Neil Ferguson, and Peggy Noonan. And then we'll have a number of heads of state the week after or the week after that. It's a very exciting and intense place designed precisely to expose people to a variety of ideas and, by the way, take questions from the audience. So this school, this mission of public service and this forum all come together here tonight and under the auspices of the Institute of Politics, which runs our forum and leads our activities in many of these respects. And I just want to note the passing, of course, of Senator Edward Kennedy. His deepest engagement with the school, and it was a quite intense engagement, was in fact through the Institute of Politics, which he saw as in some ways the living memory of his brother, John F. Kennedy. And this is a senator, and those of you that have worked with senators know when they say they're coming to something, it's about 50-50. And that's if it's important. We have several advisory board meetings a year. Throughout his entire Senate career until he got ill, he basically never missed a meeting. It's really an intense and exciting thing. So I want to just take one moment here to have a moment of silence to recognize this man who really did believe deeply in public service. Whether you liked his politics or didn't like it or his positions, the one thing we all can agree on, the man served the country, and we all deeply believe in public service. So please, a moment of silence. Thank you. So this is about inspiring public service, and as I mentioned, this school is all about it. Tonight's forum is part of a whole constellation of events that we're going to try and do for those of you that are here at the school and beyond the school throughout the university to try and engage and encourage people to think about exciting, novel, innovative, important ways in which they can serve their nations, our world. And goodness knows it's a critical time for it. There will be a variety of activities yet to come at the university level. You'll see more and more work going on here. But we live it every day here. Our faculty teaches about public service, but it also engages in it. We're right now trying to work with the Obama administration thinking about how to make public service and government hiring more effective and more throughout. Of course, our students live it and learn it, and we're going to hear from 4 remarkable people this evening. But when I go around the world, I'm struck that I see people not only who are talking about policy, but also doing the work. We have people here that talk about health policy, but they also deliver health care. We have veterans, and we also have people that try and make veterans' lives better. We have world leaders. We also have people that elect world leaders or serve world leaders and participate in all kinds of ways. And so whether we're talking about someone that is the head of state or working in the darkest and most remote and rural areas, perhaps poorest in the country, that's what we're all about. And one of the people in this school that has been as instrumental and as focused on public service, both in his own career, but also in helping and pushing the school to be about leadership in public service is, in fact, our own David Gergen here. David will be the moderator of the panel. He is the director of the Center for Public Leadership, and it's hard to imagine a more distinguished person when it comes to service. He's served for 4 different presidents, Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and Clinton. You may have noticed those are not all one party. This is a rare and especially important event. He served in the U.S. Navy. He's worked as an editor of U.S. News and World Report. He now is a senior, he's worked on McNeil-Lehrer, and now he's frequently as a senior analyst on CNN, and many of us would turn to CNN during the elections, hoping that we'd get more of David Gergen, because he was the only analyst, in my view, that you could count on not to know what he's going to say ahead of time. And this was a good thing, because it was, well, if Gergen thinks that, then it's true, but if that... Well, that's, we would never say such things. It's also not true.
But you were thinking it.
Not, I wasn't at all. And he's involved in everything from Teach for America to other universities. So with no further ado, please welcome David Gergen and this entire panel.
Thank you. Thank you, David, and thank all of you for joining us this evening. This is, in many ways, the most distinguished forum in the university, and it has attracted people of enormous influence and over the years, and it's particularly fitting that Dean Elwood has, along with Bill Parcell and the IOP, have initiated a tradition now that each year opens with a conversation about public service. It's something that goes very deep with David Elwood. He's co-heading a summit in Washington, D.C. In a few weeks' time this fall, working with the White House and with others on public service, and you will see him at the forefront, I think, in the weeks and months ahead, as the Obama administration tries to draw more people into public service, working with them to see how avenues can be opened up. So David, thank you for kicking this off this evening, and thank you again for underscoring the importance of Senator Kennedy. I hope tonight we can bring out some of the passion of Senator Kennedy for public service, and also leaven it with some of his humor. One of the fun moments I thought of the memorial services last Friday night was Senator Dodd recalling how he'd just come through prostate cancer surgery this summer and getting a call from Teddy, and Teddy's telling him, "Chris, well, I guess you had to make a choice between prostate surgery or going to town hall meetings, and you sure as hell made the right choice." Which I've enjoyed greatly. We have a wonderful panel this evening, all graduates of the Kennedy School, all of whom and three of whom are now in public service, all four of whom have at various times been in public service, but they've also, a couple of them here have had experience in the private sector. And what I thought we'd do is have a couple of rounds, at least, up here of conversation. First of all, to draw forth their story, and then to ask them for some fairly unvarnished counsel to those of you who are here now, or who are thinking about public service jobs. Where the heck do you work? How do you get in? What do you do? How do you make it up? All of these people have faced those questions. But let's first hear their stories. And what I'd like to do is introduce each of you, and I'll introduce you, and then you tell us something about your story, what drew you into public service, what drew you out of public service. But Wavina, and by the way, I just learned about 5 minutes ago I was introducing him, so if I stumble, please forgive. Wavina Belmonte actually started in the private sector of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. She was a London bureau chief for a number of years back in the 90s, covered all sorts of major stories, was a producer, directed the London bureau, and then she moved from, and she gained a great interest in the welfare of children around the world, and she moved from the private sector into the nonprofit sector and went to UNICEF. She worked there for a number of years, came to the Kennedy School, graduated this last June, and is now the communications director for UNICEF in New York City. And as you know, UNICEF is an enormously important organization that's contributed a great deal over the years. Well, Vina, fill in the rest of the story, if you would. What drew you out of journalism into the nonprofit sector? What are the satisfactions, the upsides, the downsides, as you see them?
Well, the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, is actually a public broadcaster in Canada. It's Canada's version of the BBC. So journalists...
But independent of the government.
Right, absolutely. And the journalism career was a fantastic step and a wonderful first career. I come from a first-generation immigrant family. My dad grew up in Civil War Spain. He moved to Belgium. They were accepted Immigrants from Spain were only accepted in Belgium at the time, working in coal mines. He worked in coal mines there, went to Canada, and so the international sphere was something that was always interesting to me. So journalism was a natural fit. Seeing a lot of the world through journalism was a fantastic frontline experience. The shift was, journalism changed a lot, as you know very well. And I thought...
Not necessarily for the better.
Exactly. And I just thought that the change that I wanted to be a part of, I wasn't going to be able to do as effectively anymore as I might do by joining an organization like UNICEF, where I really believe in the mission and the mandate. And the one common denominator, I would say, in both careers is I've loved what I've done. And it's easy to get up in the morning, certainly working at UNICEF, knowing what it is that you're doing, why it is that you're doing it, and who it is that you're doing it for.
Now, what do you do?
Well, Director of Communications.
Yeah, we all know about the Christmas and holidays. We all have UNICEF cards. But tell me beyond that.
Well, some of the major kind of programmatic things that UNICEF does on the ground, child survival remains one of the big challenges. Around 9 million children under the age of 5 die every year from things like pneumonia, diarrhea, malaria, measles, things that are absolutely preventable. So part of what we do with governments around the world is figure out how to build stronger health systems so that that kind of thing doesn't happen. Child protection issues, child labor, sexual exploitation.
And how do you get engaged as a communications director? Do you have a chance to travel around the world to bear witness to the hardships and the suffering, and then bring that message? How do you do that? And how are you using the internet? Is that something you're really now pushing very hard? Or do you use television more? What are your...
A range, because our audience is in different places as well. Our audience is in donor countries, our audience is in the developing world. A lot of the communications that we do is what we call communications for development. It's not necessarily what you see in a newspaper. It really is about teaching, for example, better hygiene. We're talking about the H1N1 virus now.
So this is not just about raising money, it's also about helping people.
It's changing behaviors, it's advocacy. Raising money, of course, is part of it. But it's also to provide a platform for a host of groups. UNICEF is 11,000 staff. That is not how you're going to do a seismic shift in child survival.
What is your proudest accomplishment there?
That's an easy one. In 2005, I worked on a campaign on children and AIDS. A generation of coverage and attention on the AIDS issue had not really talked about children and AIDS and what that meant and what that represented. So the real communications challenge there was profiling the missing face of AIDS, which for us was children, and starting to define that and bring that to people's attention. In a fundraising way, that was to go to donor governments and say, can you ring-fence your funding? And what we mean by that is, of all the money that you give to AIDS programs, can you make sure that X percentage goes to specific programs targeting children? And so that was on the fundraising side, advocacy side. What is it that we can do in program countries in sub-Saharan Africa and other places to attack that? And where is the problem? Because around the world, the problem looked very different. Sub-Saharan Africa, it's orphans and vulnerable children. And then what we found in many places is that mother-to-child transmission was one of the main things. And that's actually very easily preventable. And cheap, too. So we started to develop a program to make sure that we tailor-made it to the region where it fits. And we did that, we started that in 2005. And we've made great strides. One, in awareness. Two, in the way the money is funneled in the system, and making sure it goes where it counts.
So all of this is deeply satisfying to you?
I love getting up in the morning.
You do?
Yeah, really. Absolutely. And I think that's true. I'm sure we'll hear it from the other panelists, but when I look at colleagues wherever they work, whether it's in a headquarters position, whether it's in a country office, there's just an enormous commitment to the mission and mandate, and that really carries you through. It's what brings you back. It's deeply, deeply satisfying.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Ray Jefferson is someone that you should know if you don't already. Ray grew up in the state of New York, went to West Point, became an Army officer. He was in the Rangers and the Special Forces, which, as you know, are the toughest parts of the Army. Had a brilliant career ahead of him, seemed to be headed toward it. He had a lot of leadership experience at West Point. And one day, while he was out with his troops, someone by accident detonated a grenade, which threatened to kill everyone. And Ray Jefferson threw himself on top of the grenade to save his comrades. And as a result of that, he lost 5 fingers on his left hand and lost his future in the military. After recuperating, he came here to the Kennedy School. And he graduated, and then he got a joint degree over at or concurrent degree at the business school, and graduated in the year 2000. He was a prominent figure here. It was my early days at the Kennedy School. 2 or 3 of us, Joe Nye and I and some others, recommended him for a White House fellowship, which he won, and which was very hard to get, as you know. It's very competitive. I think we have 3 or maybe 4 Kennedy School graduates who are White House Fellows this year. We have a real breakthrough this year on that. But Ray was one of the early ones. And I remember well his time there. And went back, spent time in Hawaii in state government, and eventually wound up going to McKinsey. And spent time in the private sector and helped to start a leadership program in Asia. He was living in Singapore. I think a lot of that story had to do with the young woman who lived there, but we'll leave that for now. At least I saw her on several occasions, and so I guess the relationship has ended because he's back. At any event, Ray has gone to work in the Obama administration, and he's now an assistant secretary of the Labor Department. And is working on Veterans Affairs there at the Labor Department, Assistant Secretary for the Veterans Employment and Training Service, which serves as the National Advocate for Veterans Employment. Very important in this day and age, and as someone who is a veteran who gave so much to his country. Ray, we're honored to have you back, and congratulations on joining the administration and the job you did. Tell us about your journey.
Sure. Let me just first say what an honor it is to be back here tonight as an alumni of the Kennedy School. I remember so vividly sitting in these rows just a few years ago and coming to these forums. So I just want to tell you it's a real thrill to be here with you. I just recently had the privilege of being sworn in, and when I found out I was invited to this panel, there's a poem that I heard recently that I wanted to share with us, if I may. It's called The Dash by Linda Ellis. It's brief, and it goes like this. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on her tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted that first came the date of her birth and spoke of the following date with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was the dash between the years. That dash represents all the time that she spent alive on Earth. And now only those who loved her know what that little line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we live and love and how we spend that dash. So think about this long and hard. Are there things you'd like to change? For you never know how much time is left, how much can be rearranged. So when your eulogy is being read, with your life's actions to rehash, would you be proud of the things they say about how you spent your dash? I think all of us are here tonight because we're thoughtful and we care about how we spend our dash. I would just say that I began my life with a vision for one career. As an Army officer, doing what we call commando type work, and I really loved that. On October 18th, when I was doing some classified training and realized that one of our hand grenades was defective and was counting down early, I held on to it to protect my men, because there was nowhere safe to throw it. And for the period after that, I felt that my life was over. That everything I worked so hard for had just disappeared. I spent a lot of time crying, I don't mind saying, a lot of time just wondering, how I could get my life back together. But what I wanted to share with you is that, the tests that we have in life can become our testimony. And one thing that's necessary is not to give up on your dream. And I had a lot of help, a lot of support that allowed me to create a new dream. And that new dream involved many of the things that David shared here today. But I think there's many things that we can learn from one another, and I think that we were going to hear wonderful lessons from our colleagues on the panel today. If I was to conclude, I guess, this round with one thought, it's this. Don't give up on your dream. Be willing to ask for help when you need it. And when things start moving forward in your life, take the time to reach back and find out who else needs help achieving their dream.
Thank you, Ray. I have two follow-up questions I want to ask you. You started out on the public side, and then you went to McKinsey. I know you were very excited about that job. It was a big opportunity. You loved what you were doing there in Asia. And then you came back into public service. Mm-hmm. Have you made a commitment to one or the other, or do you plan to go back and forth? And what do you find the relative appeals are and the downsides between your private sector experience and your public sector experience?
Thank you, David. Let me share my approach to life. One of the elements of leadership, or one of the first steps, is self-awareness. And one of the things that I realized about myself is I just love leadership. I love helping people and organizations achieve their potential and overcome challenges. So as I looked at how I wanted to live that line of work, I wanted to try to do it in all sectors, public, private, and nonprofit. So I came and studied at the Kennedy School, but also at the business school. Spent time serving as Deputy Secretary of Commerce in Hawaii. I wanted to broaden myself and apply leadership in the private sector in McKinsey. I'd say my commitment going forward is to continue to find opportunities to serve and to help people's lives, to help organizations in the public sector and in the private sector as well, David.
Let me ask you this other question. This may be too personal, but I really would enjoy you sort of working it through for us. Mm-hmm. My experience in talking with you over the years has been that you brought an enormous amount of idealism to public service. You had these very, very high standards that you thought were important in public service. That's what drew you in. And you encountered periodic frustrations in Washington and Hawaii, and you've just started this. But I remember moments when you felt, this is not what I thought it was going to be. There are people who are disappointing to me within this realm. How do you deal with that? How have you, I thought that was one of your real challenges in life, to figure out how am I going to be comfortable in something which is not all that I would like it to be, but you continue to have those aspirations and that drive.
Well, the short answer is try to be in charge as quickly as you can. I think a very authentic answer is part of the journey of public service is that we want to change, we want to make things better, and we care about that. And I think there's people who come into public service for different reasons. And sometimes I think when you work for someone who you believe is there genuinely out of concern and regard for the mission and the community, and then later on we will encounter people for whom it's more about self-service than public service. I think that we need to have some patience and understanding for the different motivations people have, but to remain true to our motivation.
And so how do you deal with people, bosses who are, A lot of people, this happens, you're not alone in finding that there are frequently people, when you go in highly motivated, you idealize the situation, you run in there and you, oh my God, look at this person. Or they're in the kitty, or they're doing this or doing that.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Well, I'll tell you, if I could make one suggestion to the school, and I say it seriously, it'd be really valuable to have maybe a short seminar one afternoon that we can use to prepare our students for how do you survive and thrive in challenging, senior subordinate relationships. Because it's a longer conversation, but I'll talk about this. One is find something in the mission, find something in the organization that you love and care about and that nurtures you and sustains you. Number two, have allies, people around you in challenging situations who can help you see what you don't see and who can advise and mentor you and to give you information that you may not have access to. It's very hard to see the picture when you're in the frame. So it's very important that we have people who can give us guidance, ideas, and insights, and to broaden our perspective and give us other options for dealing with situations.
You're on for a conversation follow-up. All right?
Yeah.
Let's look at that.
All right,
It's a
thank
good
you.
idea. Cody Keenan went to Northwestern. And I'm not quite sure when the transition was, but he took a job as an unpaid intern in the office of Senator Teddy Kennedy and worked his way up to be a legislative assistant on the HELP committee, the committee that Senator Kennedy was chairing and had to guide from afar during his illness. But the committee, that's the one committee in the Senate that has reported a health care reform bill. So far, we're awaiting Senate Finance. But Cody had clearly had a capacity not only for policymaking, but for communication. And he went on to do some speech writing. He came here. He was part of the Obama campaign, left the Obama campaign to come to the Kennedy School, graduated in the summer, June of '08, went back to the campaign. Now, that's taking a risk, believe me, to leave a campaign, go to school, and then sort of think you can reestablish yourself. You would only take that risk if they thought you were pretty darn good, right? So they had to think he was very good. And he remained with the campaign, and now, lo and behold, he's in the White House. And where he's working with John Favreau and a very talented group of people. And he has written on subjects ranging all across the lot. But not only on the economy, but on healthcare. So we'll ask him to give us a sneak preview in a moment about next Wednesday night. But in the meantime, Cody, we're delighted you're here. Thank you for taking time out. I know how hard it is to leave and to come here, so it's a real sacrifice on his part. But it's also true that we're honored to have you here, and I think people really were interested in knowing how your life has gone, taking this path, how you could wind up. How old are you now?
28.
28. Winding up at the White House at 28.
My boss is younger. Well, I echo what Ray said. This is really, really exciting to be back. I just left here a year and a half ago. And I spent as much time in this room as I possibly could, so I would advise everybody to do that, although I will say the lights are a lot brighter up here. I say this with no small shame that I got into public service for all the wrong reasons. I didn't think I was entering public service. I thought I was entering politics. I thought I was entering the TV show The West Wing.
Interesting.
Well, I was a kid just out of college. I was 21, and thinking it would all be glitz and glamour and power and fun. And you learn very, very quickly it's not. I interviewed all over the Hill. I didn't know anybody in Washington, and finally I saw a posting for an internship in Senator Kennedy's office, and I actually knew who he was. So I kept calling and badgering him for it, and finally I called on a Friday afternoon when the intern coordinator wanted to go home. So she just hired me right on the spot and said, come on in Monday. You learn quickly it's not about point scoring and politics and winning and ideology. My first job was, opening the mail, filing it, sorting it, taking constituent phone calls. And reading some of those letters, you quickly figure out that this is about people's lives. Most of the phone calls we would get would be from people outside of Massachusetts because he was their senator. You would say, have you tried calling your senator? And sometimes they wouldn't know who it was. They thought Teddy Kennedy was their senator. And, they considered him their senator. And that that kind of changed my outlook pretty fast. So I really dove into it, trying to learn everything I could, and moved up to the legislative staff. And when you're watching him on the floor, he can be a force of nature down there, and very inspiring. But he never let us forget. For him, it certainly wasn't about pushing ideology, creating new acronyms in the government, winning points. Because more often than not, I was there during Republican Congress, we lost. We would bring up Pell Grants a couple times a year, minimum wage, things like that, and we would lose over and over and over again. And some of us would take it pretty hard, but he would always be thinking, who can I get to make this happen next time? Because it's about people's lives. The Pell Grants are for the kid who wouldn't be able to afford college otherwise. WIC is for a woman who wants to raise a healthy baby. CHIP is for someone who can actually give her kid health care. He always saw that, and that's an important lesson to learn. And that's why I came here straight from his staff, because I wanted to really get into it. I left one of the best schools of government to come to the Kennedy School of Government, the best school of government. So I had an extraordinary leg up when I got here just from what I learned from him. And a piece of advice I would give you is stay loose and expect the unexpected here, because I wasn't planning on being a speechwriter. It just kind of happened as a fluke. And I joined the campaign the summer between years. Came back here to finish and went back, and it was an extraordinary risk. I was terrified, but they brought me back, for which I'm very grateful.
You did think you were taking a risk?
A huge risk, yeah, missing the primaries,
Yeah.
and I regret that to an extent.
Oh, you did?
I regret missing the primaries, not coming here to get my degree. I'm
Right,
thrilled.
but right. But you wish you could have done both.
Yeah, because my friends here and I would sit around every night watching TV, CNN, and watching the primary returns every night on the edge of our seats, and I'd be emailing the guys back in Chicago, trying to be a part of it, and wishing I was there, but thrilled I was here to be able to finish this, and very, very grateful they brought me back.
Speechwriting is one of the few areas where, when you're young, you can be actually at the table. Often if you become a policy maven, it takes years to work up that you're actually there at the table at 28 to be there with the president in various settings with cabinet officers. Obviously it's an education in itself. You've got a new school that you're going to. But tell us what it's like to be a young speechwriter in the Obama White House.
They don't look at you as you're young. They look at you and ask, what do you think? And the first thing you learn is, don't just say, I think you're right. Good, very good, sir. You come up with an argument and answer and tell them why. The first time I actually met the president was in the Oval Office, even though I was a deputy writer on the campaign, so I basically handled scripts, shorter things like that, working my way up and really learning, because I'd never had a speechwriter job before. And so I'd seen him a couple times in Chicago, but he was almost always on the road. He came back maybe 2 or 3 times. So I remember, this was about 3 days after Inauguration Day, and I'd written remarks for him that day, and his assistant Katie called and said, the president wants to see you. And so first of all, I threw on my coat, ran, I'm right across the driveway in the EOB, and I hadn't been up around the Oval Office yet, so I asked a Secret Service agent how to get to the Oval Office. And they're not exactly eager to help you find the president. So I finally had to find another staffer I knew and go up there, and you're just, it's the greatest home field advantage on earth. The second you walk in there, you're marble-mouthed, you're terrified, even though he's your boss. And I could barely get a word out, but he found out I'm from Chicago too, and he had a couple really minor edits, and he said, basically, I just wanted to meet you because I saw a new name on the speech. Asked me a couple questions, where I was from, told him north side of Chicago. He said, so you're a Cubs fan? I said, yeah. He's a White Sox fan, so he gave me some grief on that for a little while, and that was it. But at first it's terrifying, but you grow into it pretty quickly.
And do you see him periodically now when you're working on a speech?
Yep.
And
he's intimately involved in everything we write.
He is, so that how would you assume, without getting into the content, what would you assume the process would be like, and how would you be involved? The president's giving a joint session speech to the Congress just announced, or been reported today, next Wednesday night on health care. Really important, crucial speech, obviously. How would you imagine the process will unfold in the White House over the next week or so?
Sure. Most of our speeches aren't that large scale. When they are, there will be maybe an hour-long meeting with him in the Oval, with the lead writer, any writers that will be helping, policy staff, David Axelrod, Rahm Emanuel, and they'll get the president's input, go do a draft, and it'll maybe go back 3 or 4 times.
Speechwriters will be there with Axelrod and
yes.
Rahm. Right.
Yeah, and we meet with David Axelrod every day, which is the highlight of our day.
We do, as a group.
As a group, yep.
And he talks through sort of themes for the day, insights, political insights, where you're going to take the argument.
Yep, and that keeps us grounded, because he's kind of a true believer like we are. He's a big idealist, and that half hour is a really grounding experience every day.
Interesting.
We look forward to that.
Interesting. And so, will the first draft come from the president, or will it come from you all?
First draft will come from us, and he'll sometimes weigh in with more ink than paper, with more ink on the page than white space, I mean. And it'll go back a few times until it's ready.
And where does this lead for you, do you think?
This job?
This experience, yeah. Where would you like, ideally? I mean, obviously, you have a shot, but
Sorry.
what?
That was a sigh.
Where would you? I would imagine you do not envision yourself being a speechwriter the rest of your life. So what might you do?
I think about that a lot, and I don't have an answer.
Yeah.
Because I never envisioned myself here a couple
Yeah.
years ago. And it's such an extraordinary honor and privilege and opportunity that I can't imagine doing anything else. I mean, I know most people don't make it 8 years, but I'd really like to.
Really?
Yeah.
Good for you. Good for you. Well, your story about meeting the president for the first time in the Oval Office recalls Peggy Noonan's coming here to the IOP this fall. And as many of you know, she wrote one of the most famous speeches of the Reagan period. It was a 40th anniversary of D-Day. It was a Point to Hoc speech. And she met him for the first time after she wrote that speech. After she wrote the speech. Unbelievable. Thank you for coming again, and we'll come back in just a minute. Now for a somewhat different perspective, for Margita Thompson. Margita has had a very interesting life with a lot of activity in California. She's been involved with leadership positions in the Latino community there. She's been honored in San Diego as like one of the 50 people in the state to watch. She was Governor Schwarzenegger's press secretary, and she has also had spent time in the Bush White House. And she was the press secretary to Lynn Cheney, the vice president's wife. She has also worked as a political producer for the Larry King Show. So she has, like you, has had experience in television, and has now, since leaving the White House, and I don't know when you graduated. You graduated a year ago, 2 years?
From the Kennedy School, 96.
96, that's right. Okay, I should have remembered that.
Although I'd like to think it was just a year ago.
Well, it's always hard to tell.
I like
But she's now gone into the private sector. I don't know whether that was because of the results of the election or not.
No, Governor Schwarzenegger won re-election, but after 3 years of being his press secretary, I didn't have the energy. And I did have to leave because it was absolutely exhausting.
Now, you've now gone to HealthNet.
I work at HealthNet.
And which is a for-profit, publicly traded company, and you're the vice president of corporate communications. We have a lot of communicators up here. Tell us, have you made a permanent switch into the private sector, Margita, or do you think this is temporary? You can't. I'm sure it's going to be for a while, but. And tell us about the positives, negatives. Tell us about your life and sort of what you've concluded from all of that.
I'll give you the more recent part. I graduated from the Kennedy School and I went to work for a public affairs firm in Austin, Texas. But my client was the government of Mexico, and we were helping improve the image of Mexico in the United States. And it was during a time when Mexico was going through its recertification process and being a partner in the war on drugs. And the reason I bring that up is that it's really important for you to know that you can be involved in public policy and public service while in the private sector. And so that's what was my first leap, was going into Austin, Texas. After that, I went and I worked for a trade association called TechNet. And that was at the beginning of the new economy, and it was a really exciting time, and it was working to help educate legislators at a national and state level about what was happening in Silicon Valley, because at that point it was the harbinger of things to come, and everything was very much of trying to realize the potential of what was then new technology with the internet and so forth. After that, I was tapped to be press secretary for the California campaign for President Bush, well then candidate Bush, Governor Bush. And so I worked in California doing the presidential campaign. I was then tapped to be press secretary for Mrs. Cheney. I got to work in the White House. I was in the White House on September 11th, which really is when I understood the true physical sacrifice that you can sometimes have with public service. And I very much, for the first time, understood what military go through as I was trying to flee the White House and realizing that the military are the people that go toward the danger.
Yeah, did you literally had to run for it, didn't you?
We did have to run for it.
You were in East Wing?
I was in the EEOB, but I went over, my friend who was the assistant to the vice president called me and said, meet me, we need to get out of here. And so I went out onto West Exec, and I was just standing there, and Liz Cheney happened to walk by, and I saw the limo. And she said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm waiting for Ashley to come out. And she said, you go grab her and get the hell out of here. So I brilliantly went into the West Wing, which was even more the center of danger, and you just see everyone being evacuated into the mess.
Into the mess?
Into the mess.
Downstairs?
Downstairs. And so we were waiting there, and it was complete silence, and all you could hear was the clicking of the camera, because there's always the photographer taking pictures for posterity's sake.
As over here.
As over here, exactly. and so then the uniformed Secret Service came in, and they said, grab your stuff and get out of here. And as we're going down West Exec, someone said, run as fast as you can, the plane's about to hit. Now, this is happening, you're a press person, and at that point it was Pebble Beach. Now I think that they've made it very nice and slick, but at that point it was a little bit more rustic, but all of the TV cameras are facing us, filming us. And so the press person in me thinks, the last thing you want the American people to see are people running like mad out of the White House, but then you also think, well, I don't want them to see me exploded coming out of the White House either. So running as fast as we could, but it was one of those moments where now I still can't hear the national anthem without tearing up, because it's just such a searing moment to make you realize so many different things about how proud you are to be an American, about the passion of public service, how much more riveted you are to realizing that we need to come together as a nation for the common good. So that was what happened in the White House. But I ended up leaving a few months later to go work on Dick Riordan's campaign for governor. And so I went from being at the height of power in the White House and 6 weeks later being unemployed because he lost the primary. So that's the nature of careers when you're involved in elective office, is that one day you could have the greatest job in the world and the next day you got nothing. But then Noelia was kind enough, and she had me working with First Lady Laura Bush, and so I had a fabulous summer of doing press advance for the First Lady's trip to Europe, which was absolutely a fantastic way to be unemployed. Then, then I ended up taking a job being political producer for Larry King Live. And it's one of those jobs where I didn't even know that job existed. And yet it was a fabulous opportunity. I got to work with the media, and I loved it. And one of the things I was asked to do was to cover the special election that was happening for California governor. And so from there, I got offered the job to be Governor Schwarzenegger's press secretary, which was a fabulous opportunity, and I loved taking it. But it's a winding route.
Well, it goes back to Cody's point about being prepared for the unexpected.
Being prepared for the unexpected and willing to take a leap of faith. It's not the Soviet 5-year plan where I have this rigid idea of what it is that I'm going to be doing tomorrow. You just don't know, but you have to be prepared and ready to take advantage of whatever opportunities come out.
So why HealthNet? What is HealthNet, and how do you like it?
I like it. HealthNet, it's interesting because, again, going back to you can be involved in public policy and in the private sector, and I think it's very important to have people in the private sector that have the sensibility about public service, because we need to make sure that we're bicultural in terms of being able to understand corporations as well, because that's a big part of what it is that is being regulated, governed, et cetera. So I think about it too. What is it that the Kennedy School needs to enhance that ability to interact things? And I think about it in terms of bring your pen, which is you have to understand politics, you have to have empathy, and you have to know the numbers. If there's anything that I can recommend to people, you need to know how to read a balance sheet when you leave here. That's really, really important. You need to understand what the basic financial underpinnings are of a company if you're going to be making decisions on how to regulate it. So I'm learning a lot about investor relations and Wall Street, which is really important when you're on this balance beam of working at a healthcare company where you're providing what is seen as a social good, but you have financial responsibility to shareholders. And so it's interesting.
What is the social good?
Healthcare.
I don't understand quite what HealthNet does.
It provides HMO, PPO. It's a health insurer.
It was a health insurer.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. So you're all in favor of public option, right? That's what you want the president to call for next Wednesday, right?
Well, one of the misconceptions is that health insurers are not for health care reform. We're absolutely for health care reform. We believe in universal coverage. We've talked about getting rid of pre-existing conditions in terms of having an individual mandate married with guaranteed issue. And so one of the things that's wonderful about coming to the Kennedy School is that you learn how to have discussions and debates with people that you may disagree with. I just met earlier with the 6 Republicans that are here at the Kennedy School. And so that was wonderful to get to meet with them. And I was telling them about how when I was at the Kennedy School, it's a little bit hard because everyone wants to challenge what they believe, and they only have you to challenge it with. So you've got 400 people that are coming towards you that are having you chop, defend yourself right now. But it's a great training for you because I'm on my game. I know how to defend myself, but you're able to do it in a way where you can be friends afterwards. And I think that that's what is missing once you leave these hallowed halls, is that people no longer understand how to maintain those ties and have those discussions. But I think that's the sign of true statesmanship.
Yeah, terrific,
Yeah.
terrific. I think we ought to go directly to the, I'd like to invite questions now. So there are microphones here and here. Please, the tradition is that we have 2 microphones on this floor. We have 2 microphones there, and there conceivably, I think there are 2 more mic here. So if you have a question, I'd welcome it. And there's where's the question? I can't quite see it. There are 2 microphones here. Yes, sir, please. Come on up. Come on up, though, now. And I have a lot more questions for these folks. But with the House rules, the Joe Nye rules, tell us who you are, 1 question per customer, and remember that every question ends with a question mark. Okay.
My name is Ahmed Jalal. I'm participant of the MPA ID program. My question is directed to Cody. And Cody, I think one of the coolest jobs would be to be part of the Obama campaign, given what you achieved. And I think it's amazing to be part of that. I want to draw you back to a speech that Obama made. It was a New Hampshire primary speech. It's a beautifully written speech, and it moves you emotionally. One of the sentences in there is that, yes, we can. And it was the call of a king who took us to a mountaintop and showed us the way to the promised land. Yes, we can, to equality and justice. And as someone who's interested in speech writing, I want to find out your view, because to me, there's a lot of religious undertones, the undertones of religious scriptures in some of the political speeches that Obama delivers. And I want to find out if that's something that people draw from Bible or from religious scriptures. It won't be the first time, because Lincoln used to read the Bible every night, and his speeches were heavily drawn from Bible. So was William Wilberforce, who was one of the leading lights of the campaign against slavery. So I wanted to get your tips. Like, is reading the Bible and getting ideas from there great for political speeches or writing them? People also read Robert Burns and stuff like that. That would be quite useful. And how to put yourself in a position, because these jobs are not very common, that people notice you so that they can pick you to be, a political speechwriter for them. Sure. Thanks a lot.
Good question. I'll try to answer both parts. Yeah, I mean, the president's a very religious man, of course. And the Bible as a rhetorical device, even if you don't believe in it, it's incredible stories, incredible moral lessons to draw from. He was also talking about King there, who he's a huge fan of. So we will draw on that. We'll draw from almost anywhere. I get inspiration at bus stops sometimes, looking at, a fun slogan. I actually just keep a notebook with me to write down everything I see. And you'll get it in the weirdest places, but we rely heavily on the Bible. Second question, there aren't many speechwriters, to my knowledge. It's a pretty small profession. And I've only met one speechwriter that went to college saying he wanted to be a speechwriter. You just kind of get plucked up in a weird way. When I was working for Senator Kennedy, my boss didn't have time to write a speech, so he asked me if I could try it. And I still have it, and it's terrible if you read it now. At the time, I thought it was pretty good. But somebody notices, they ask you to do it again. You start writing for somebody else, and eventually you just kind of get picked up. It's a pretty small world.
Yeah, you'll have a chance. We mentioned Peggy Noonan earlier. I'm sure she'll be doing some seminar kind of work on speechwriting as well when she's here at the IOP. Yes, ma'am, please.
Hello, my name is Naima Green, and I'm an MPP2. I'm right in the beginning of my second year here, and I'm hoping to make the most of it. So I was wondering if each of you could talk about something you wish you had done more of, or some opportunity you wish you had taken advantage of while you were here, and also tell us how coming to the Kennedy School has helped you personally or professionally.
I don't mind starting. And your first name is Naime?
Naima.
Naima, all right. I think there's different ways that you can approach your Kennedy School experience. I had some classmates who said, I want to come, do the best I can in all my classes, get good grades, and that would be success. But I'd like to encourage you to look at this place as an opportunity to develop lifelong relationships and lifelong friendships. At least that's the approach I took. And of course, to do that with your classmates and people in different classes. But also to spend time cross-enrolling and going over to the business school and the law school and to spend some time at the Fletcher School. But also meet the professors. Meet the people who have deep expertise in areas that you're interested in. One of the things that's been tremendously helpful professionally, but also just giving great meaning to my life, is having relationships with people like Alexandra Martinez, David Gergen, Marie Danziger. So if I'm giving a big speech, I don't have Cody to help me do the writing, but I can call Marie and bounce some ideas off her. If I'm about to make a major career move, I've given David a call over the years, or Alexandra. So developing relationships with people here who have deep expertise in areas that you want to develop. And after you leave the school, keep the relationship alive. Come back for the refreshers, come back for the reunions, find ways that you can contribute to the alumni in your local area. Make it like a living, lifelong experience. Those would be my thoughts.
Yeah, if you've got your checkbook handy right now, actually, there. Other questions here? Yes, sir, please.
Hi, Anirudh Suri. I'm an MPA student here. You guys have all talked about different career moves, and I was wondering if you could talk to us more about the dilemmas you might have faced, sometimes maybe moving between sectors, maybe the kinds of dilemmas that were going in your head, maybe financial, maybe career, long-term career moves, and how you dealt with them.
I'll take that because I probably made the biggest shift from working in state government to working for a company. I was terrified when I left the governor's office because I had no idea how I was going to feel, because I was living Arnold Schwarzenegger's life, and it was fabulous. I was on private planes, and we were doing really important work, but he's such an interesting individual that we were going to the Arnold Classics, so I knew all about bodybuilding. I got to go to the Golden Globes. Besides, whenever there was anything happening, I flew over. Right now we have the fires in California. I know exactly what the press secretary now is going through, being on a helicopter with him, really doing a lot of the work, being in the middle of it. So going to work outside of that, it scared me. But I was also completely exhausted because it was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But going to work for a healthcare company, it's a highly regulated industry. It's all about public policy. You just happen to be working in the private sector. And at that point when I left, healthcare reform was really big in California. My CEO is the head of our National Trade Association at AHIP. He's very different than any typical CEO of a healthcare company. He's a liberal Democrat. He's a little bit quirky. That's very similar to Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's very involved in public policy and trying to do what's best. So I'm allowed to maintain that passion for public policy, but it's because I have a very unique CEO. So it's trying to keep that going. But I will also say that it's hard because you're more emotionally invested in it when you work for a person than when you work for a company. It's a little bit more of a 9-to-5 job. I don't take great moral outrage when someone happens to attack healthcare companies.
You do, but can you explore that a little more deeply? Because the healthcare companies have been, or health insurance companies have been cast as the villains in this script by some. And from your point of view, having gone from the public sector over to the private sector, how comfortable have you been with that? How did you think about it? How did you work your way through that?
How am I taking some of the rhetoric that's been coming?
Yeah. Well, you've taken the incoming shots now.
Absolutely.
You know what it's like. So, just tell me about your personal comfort level, and then about your professional.
Well, first of all, I would say it's a little bit different, as opposed to when someone would criticize Arnold Schwarzenegger, I would completely have a coronary and freak out, and how could you do that, because he was the greatest person ever. Working now with a healthcare company, working for a company, it's a little bit different. What I'll say is that it is disillusioning, because I am still passionate about public policy. It does get disillusioning when you have people that are talking about companies being immoral and so forth. And we have fabulous public-private partnerships in the healthcare industry. 87 cents of your healthcare dollar goes directly to healthcare. But you have people that are throwing out saying 50% of your dollar is going towards profit. So there's a lot of misinformation that's going out there. And so it's trying to do your best, but really being disillusioned because people like Senator Kennedy that were able to forge those ties, that were able to have the credibility with their own caucus, but at the same time empathizing with the opposition to forge consensus, that really seems to be gone in this debate, and hopefully someone will be able to seize it so that we can really focus on the fundamental issue that is cost and really focus on moving the ball forward, because we really do need healthcare reform in this country.
Well, tell us, these transitions you've been through, have they been difficult for you? Have they presented dilemmas for you along the way, or has it just been pretty smooth sailing?
No, I smile at some of the common denominators in our various paths, and fear seems to be one of them.
Fear?
Fear, yeah.
Fear of what?
Fear is a motivating factor. I mean, I worked as a journalist for 15 years, and that's who I knew. Wavina, the persona of journalist, traveling all over the place, into Bosnia, into Baghdad, into Belfast, and different places. And I was comfortable with that Wavina. I thought she was kind of interesting, and that life was interesting, and the job was interesting. But really what was at the root of it was I really like to motivate people and instigate change, and that's what I thought my journalism was about. And at some point I thought, well, you're not going to keep doing this forever, so what next? And it's filling in that what next. And in fact, in my case, the what next was I opened up The Economist one day, and there was a UNICEF ad in the back, and I thought, that looks interesting. And I applied and was interviewed and didn't get the job. And the woman called me the next day and she said, you're not going to get this job, but do you mind if I shop your CV around? And I thought, wow, is that ever the most polite rejection I've ever heard? But she did actually shop the CV around, and within 3 months I got 3 job offers. So one, those job ads in The Economist, you actually do get jobs from them.
Wow. Wow. Good answer. I've never known anybody who looked to fill one of those out.
There you go. And two, keep pushing. And what I wanted to say about that transition is that UNICEF actually took a huge risk, I think, in hiring me, because they hired me as their spokesperson. So somebody who doesn't have a UNICEF background, you put them in and you parachute them into Geneva, where we have a spokesperson in New York and another one in Geneva, and they sort of took this chance, and I thought that was an amazing thing. And boy, oh boy, do you ever do your homework? Because as you're going to the press conference and you know that you're talking about issues that matter and a brand and an organization that you care about, you really don't want to go wrong. So fear there was a huge factor.
Right.
I just want to make a comment on this notion of transition. Many times in my life, coming to Harvard, when I first, David shared these wonderful things that happened when I was at school, but the very first time I mentioned to someone, a professor from another school, that I wanted to apply to Harvard, and would he help me? He said, well, Ray, when you were at West Point, your math grades weren't very good, so I'm not sure that, you'll do well if you get up to Harvard. But what I want to say is, believe and nurture your self-confidence. Don't surrender it, and believe in your dreams. I had a chance to serve as an Army officer, went on to serve as Deputy Secretary of Commerce of Hawaii, public sector leadership role, and then to McKinsey. And I'll tell you what, the transition was not that hard. The basics that allowed me to succeed in one will allow you to succeed in another. And those basics are humility, asking questions, learning, developing community, doing the best you can. So, don't let anyone say, well, you've only spent time in the public sector, don't try the private sector, or, you're only a nonprofit person. Don't let someone put you in that hole. If you have an aspiration, believe in yourself, find some people who support and believe in you as well, and go step out into it.
Good. Terrific. Do you have time for 2 more questions? Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Kristen Bielman, and it actually kind of stems off of what you were just talking about and kind of being pigeonholed into a certain area. I actually left the private sector and I work for the legislature now, and I'm getting ready to go back to grad school. But I wonder how you decided on a public administration or public policy, and because for many of you, you've taken very different paths from there. You know, from public policy to speech writing, you could have been an English major, an English major. So I just wonder if you could give some advice as to how you chose to go back when you did, and how you think that maybe has impacted the careers you've had since then.
Interesting question. Who wants to take a crack at that?
I'll say, first of all, one of the great things that the Kennedy School did for me was confidence. I have the confidence that I can absolutely achieve whatever I want to. One of the things, your first week, this is the first week for everyone at the Kennedy School, and so the first week you're there and you think, I'm the mistake. You know, oh my gosh, I just sneaked in. Then after about 6 months, you look at all your classmates and you think, they're the mistake. But by the end of the year, you're at a happy medium and you understand how everything works together. So I would say, but it is wonderful that it just gives you the confidence because you're with world-class people and you make world-class friendships and connections, and so that's why it's really worthwhile to take that break. But it is a scary thing to take a break in between your career. But you just have to have the confidence that it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, Cody, why didn't you wait? I was curious why you came when you did.
I'd worked for the senator for about 3.5 years at that point. And you know, I realized that if I really wanted, let me clarify what I said before. I got into public service for the wrong reasons because I was wrong about public service. I now consider myself in public service. But I wanted to be, I wanted to go back to his office actually after I came here. And I wanted to be at the same level as his staff, someone who had been there for decades, you know, working on the same pieces of legislation that we've been pushing through forever. And I felt like I needed to come here to get all the different views of it, to get the real economic and statistical skills that you need that I didn't have before I came. And now I don't use them at all. Because I'm a writer. That's it. Someday I will. One thing I would say is trust your instincts. You know, change can be scary. Don't be scared of it. Embrace it. But I would say learn from your classmates here, because what you'll discover is there are, however many people in this room, 400 different ways to serve. You know, one of my best friends that I met here runs a school in East Harlem for 30 kids. You know, that may not be on the same scale as saying, I work in the White House or I'm in the military, but he's going to have a more direct impact on those people than I ever will on a single person.
Is it a charter school?
East Harlem Tutorial Project. So it's kind of a before and after school program.
Interesting, interesting, interesting. Please.
I think the other thing regarding your question is the skill set that you get, whether you're in one program or another. Things like analysis, the art of communication, public speaking in some cases, the art of listening. Those things.
We don't teach that here.
You do, actually. In that room over there. I think that if you can identify what those skill sets are and present them that way, in a way it doesn't matter what the wider frame of the course was. Those are things that you can apply in a host of different jobs and will serve you well in all of them.
So going for the skill sets courses was actually a very helpful, wise place for you.
Yeah, figuring out, I mean...
You think it makes a difference whether you're MPP or, let's say, if you come when you're young, if you come when you're mid-career, it sounds to me like, you know, going for skill sets makes a lot of sense. If you come when you're young, at an MPP, you do need some substantive background. You need a policy area or some area that you can come out and take somewhere usually, don't you think?
I think it's...
MPP. Did you do the MPP?
You did the mid-career too, right.
So did I. And I think that it's always good to have a certain specialty background. Right. But that said, what you add on top of it, either through the work that you do or through the mid-career program, or I just want to echo the comment that was made earlier about the range of people that you meet here is truly phenomenal. And if I could say one thing for you to take away from some of what we're saying here is Don't worry about the grade. Don't worry about the
Good.
bidding.
Keep pushing it. What did you say about grades? What did you say about grades?
Don't worry about the grade.
Yeah.
Don't worry about the bidding. At the end of the day, don't really worry so much about, I didn't get into that class. I really wanted to get into that class. Every single person in the mid-career class that I belonged to last year, the one thing that we were sorry for was not spending more time with the classmates, whether it was the other mid-careers, whether it was the MPPs, whether it was the MPAs. That was really, each and every one of us thought, I wish I'd gotten to know that person better, even if you spent a lot of time doing some of that. So really, this is just, you learn so much from one another, the professors too, of course. But from your classmates.
We just got rid of the professors. We could really get the tuition down.
I just also encourage, especially if you're a first year here, but I think it applies at all times, especially when you have the opportunity to take a break from life and come to school. Deepen yourself, but also broaden yourself, and be thoughtful and creative about how you use your time here. My interest was leadership, so I took all the leadership courses. But I also spent time just looking at what was interesting at the law school, what was interesting at the business school, and developing relationships there, developing additional knowledge in those areas, but also being creative. When you're a student here, you can call many people, and they'll take your phone call. And if there's something that you think you're interested in, and you're not sure you want to make the commitment to it, try it out. Ask someone if you can shadow them for a day, or spend some time doing a small project with them, and just get the experience of working in things that you think you're interested in and you're not sure. So it's not always necessary to make the big leap, the big commitment. Use your time here creatively and try to get some broadening experiences while you're doing the other things which you're doing here at the school. Yeah.
Get out of your comfort zone. Last question.
Hi, my name is Tim Lyden. I just started the MPP program. I just had a quick question. Ray, you mentioned having managers that you're a little disillusioned with in public service, but then it also seems like many of you have had tremendous mentors, people that have bosses that have inspired tremendous loyalty. And I wonder if you've ever had a tension between being loyal to a principle and loyal to a person. The person, you hold them up to embody an ideal, and maybe they fall short, or is there ever a tension between, if your boss is President Obama, I mean, I'd be tough to be President Obama for one day, much less every day. So I'm just wondering if you've experienced in the breadth of your careers, maybe that tension or that you've kind of butt up between like loyal to a principle and loyal to the person who's supposed to be, shepherding, I guess, the principle or the public good.
Well, I'll start. I've been outrageously lucky with the places I've worked and the staffs I've worked with, because the Kennedy staff was like a family. Those of us who went through the campaign together, we're like a family. But that doesn't mean we don't have really heavy debates behind the scenes. I mean, everything that comes out is not just part of a ticked-off checklist that we wanted to run on and do. It's thought out, it's argued, sometimes passionately. But I've been extremely fortunate that we're all tight, we all have each other's backs, it's really easy. But one of the things that you remind me of is there will be times when you disagree with your boss, for sure. But, I would say for my job, our job is to project, our boss. And if you disagree with it, that's fine. You voice that. I recommend you voice that. But at the end, it's up to the boss.
There are two of you. If it's very brief, he's got the first shot. And then you have a quick, I'll be up to the microphone. We'll take both questions, listen to both questions. Then we're going to very briefly, we're going to close off. Go ahead, please. Brief.
On the topics that you touched about, my question is about what skills, as you reflect on your extensive and enriching career, would you advise us to learn at Kennedy School that served you well in your career?
Did you understand it? Sure. Okay. Well, let's get this question, and then we'll. Thank you. Your question, please, sir.
My question is for Ray Jefferson. You talked about convictions and lot of ideals, and we have discussed the transition and change in the career. I want to continue with my career. I'm working as civil servant in India, and I want to work on urban policy. But the dilemma I'm facing is I'll be spending $100,000, and I'll be going back to the same job with $6,000 per annum. So how can I reconcile that?
Okay.
Can I take the easy one?
Yep, you can take the easy one. Go ahead.
gentleman up there. In terms of skills that I think are really useful to take away from the school, you'll hear in many different classes, framing, in other classes, sequencing, and that has to do with how you present an argument around a policy table, around, as you're coming up with a communication strategy, in a whole host of environments. Framing and sequencing are really important. So I would say...
Is there a way you recommend we can have more constructive dialogue about public policy in public, and so that we can have, I mean, all three of you are communicators up here. What do we do to encourage? I mean, you can say whatever you want about these town halls, because I think it's healthy to have dissent in a democracy. But when people drown each other out and they can't really talk to each other, that's a wholly different proposition. And how do we have, in what's becoming a very highly polarized country yet once again, a civil dialogue that's elevating and really helps people understand both sides of the question? I'd never heard the 87 cents figure before. Never heard that before, to my knowledge. But I'm just trying to, as you just reflect for a moment as you wind up here, Dad, on that question.
Well, I think that the listening skills are really important. One of the things that we were talking about before we came on was how, again, this school offers an incredible opportunity to meet people of different cultures, different faiths, different places, and to have vibrant dialogue. And it's true that if we can't achieve that in these halls, we're going to have a lot of trouble achieving them outside, because the stands are more, people stick to their opinions in a more fixed way. This place is about dialogue. It's not about converting necessarily, but it is about hearing different points of view and having an appreciation for where other people come from. And just that, alone, is of tremendous value. Boy, if we could plant those seeds as we leave, we'd be better off.
What I will say is that while I was at the Kennedy School, there was one person that did not want to be my friend because I was Republican. And so there are people who have deep-seated and feel passionately about their partisan position. And what I would say, I would hope, is that people would feel passionately about the joint passion for public policy. And so you focus more on that shared experience as opposed to the way that you get there, which is that divides us, because we're all also unified in the ultimate outcome. And so one of the things I emailed all my friends all around the world trying to figure out what it was that they thought might be better at the Kennedy School and so forth. And what they said is that there's so much analysis that goes on here, but really having a venue where you can have the pressure put on you and be trained for having to actually make the decisions. And that might actually help, is having a class where you're so results-oriented, where you're going to have to alienate people and figuring out how you're going to have to come up and build coalitions or be comfortable with disappointing people.
Cody?
For decades, we've seen an erosion in the public's trust and confidence in, everyone from elected officials to, all across the board. Turning that around begins right here. We've been told for decades that government can't solve anything. Government's the problem. But I suspect that most of you are here because you don't believe that. And I don't believe that. We need you. What you learn here, management, decision-making, ethics, analysis, bit by bit, year by year, decade by decade, we will get that trust back, whether it's at corporations or churches or government or education. We need you. I'm asking all of you. You're going to have a tough choice at some point when there will be a big paycheck and there will be a little paycheck. I've been broke since I graduated college, but I wouldn't change a day of what I've done. We need you to come to Washington and help us make history, whether it's us, another administration, a congressperson, somebody. That's why we're here.
I can't imagine a better place to close. And thank you. And I think the appropriate person now, as we say, Uvina and Ray and Cody and Margita, thank you, to ask our dean to return, Dean Elwood, to return for a final word.
Really was terrific, and I really do hope you take to heart all that's said, but also this is just the first of what will be many opportunities. Bill Purcell right here, who leads the Institute of Politics, will be there and involved. But also to remember again, as those of you heard me say yesterday, that we are here about public service. There's actually a group called the Public Service Collaborative that at times that is fantastic. It's a student-led organization. Pam Chan and Dave Baumwall are leading it. I don't think they're here. Dave was here earlier, but again, many ways to get involved, to participate, all of these different activities. I would also emphasize one other thing. You heard 4 people today. They happen to be 4 people from the United States. They mostly are in the communications business and so forth. There are people from 90 countries. You'll hear many different other graduates and professions and ideas and so forth. If some of these inspire you, terrific. If something else inspires you, that's going to be great too. But thank you all again. Public service is what we're about. Let's all commit ourselves to figuring out ways to learn and listen and grow on all sectors and in all kinds of opportunities. Thanks again to you all. It's terrific.